Ladies and gentlemen, friends, colleagues and listeners, here we are again, another little podcast show. And we've got somebody who actually has appeared just recently. So we've got Michael White, who's the ex-president of CNS and the current president of Trade Network Consultants, TNC. We had a little bit of I wasn't sure what we were talking about there earlier, but that's just a little tongue-in-cheek between myself and Michael. So Michael, lovely to have you back on again, sir.
Great to see you again, Chris. How's things going in that part of the world?
Yeah. Not too bad at all. I've had both my jabs.
Yep.
The weather was good. It's raining at the moment, so not so good, but looking forward to traveling again very soon. So all on the up and up. Thank heavens. Yep. Thank heavens.
Same here. I've been lucky enough to have a couple of flights here in the last few weeks. So it's kind of great to be back in the air again and feel a little bit of less cabin fever going on. So yeah. It's great to see people in person again.
Yeah, no, it's amazing, isn't it? Yeah. Now, Mike, joking aside, I was thinking, like, what do I do as far as introducing this particular segment? And I thought, I'm going to call it the Why Show. And WHY. So I always use the acronym, what helps you? But in this instance, it's what helps me, because I'm going to ask you lots of whys, because I'm just running out now. I think to myself, why don't people do something? Why do they always wait for something to go wrong? Why can't they be strong enough and put some controls in place? Why can't they all get together and agree on something that makes sense, that everybody else who's in the business would say, for God's sake, do it, and do it now, and do it quickly? So there's going to be a lot of whys. Now, the subject matter I'm talking about is obviously undeclared dangerous goods. We've got the battery issue. Everybody has seen the clip on LinkedIn and every other platform with regards to the fire in Hong Kong. But it's not just that. That's not the first time something like that's happened. There's been other ones where we've seen it being dragged along and it was half on the tarmac and there was a friction issue and then it blew up. So there's loads of issues that everybody is more than familiar with. So the very first why is, Mike, why aren't people doing something permanent and with a big impact to stop the abuse of the systems that are allowing this to happen and happen again and again and again and again?
I wish I knew that ultimate answer, but I think there's a lot of parts of why. Because you look at the batteries themselves and where they're manufactured and how important they are in all of our lives, all that's going on. There's a lot of regulatory issues and political issues. Because a lot of these lithium batteries are made in China. And so you do have the Chinese government involved in some of the concerns there. But, what gets me, I go back as to why don't, the airline's perspective, this is a serious issue that could ground cargo permanently.
Yeah.
I mean, if you take a look at it, the seriousness of a trans-Pacific flight, and it's an ETOP aircraft that's extended to its full limit, and trying to get an airplane on the ground, the cargo compartment and the fire suppression system can only last so long, and that doesn't get rid of heat. So, I don't know why it isn't more, but for me personally, I've dealt with security.
Yeah,
I've dealt with a lot of issues on concerns of blowing up airplanes over the years, and trying to keep the airplane safe from a perspective of people that want to do bad things to planes. But this is an issue of commerce that we all have to address. And I first testified in front of the Department of Transportation on this issue. I believe it was in 2004 when the first issues with lithium batteries were, and it wasn't even just lithium batteries, fires in the cargo compartments in general were going on. But Pat Oppenheimer, who was the head of the dangerous goods, and myself, he was with FedEx, probably one of the smartest individuals I know ever in the world that knows about dangerous goods. And Pat and I both testified in front of Congress way back then when this issue, here we are 17 years later, and all of the tragic issues that have taken place, the UPS flight in Dubai, which considered to be a lithium battery issue, The issues, even before Hong Kong, just recently, the Ethiopian 777 on the ground in Shanghai totaled a 777 aircraft. I mean, the cost of aircraft, that's one thing. But if the lives that have been lost, which have been few, but they're important, pilots on airplanes and crews, the safety aspect. I know ALPA and other organizations are really concerned about this. But, where do we go? The next steps, I think, are kind of the issues. What do we take this to really get the visibility that I know IATA has worked on a lot, but it's got to go beyond even IATA.
100%. Now, okay, right. Lots of representative organisations have been working on it, debating it, talking about it, and you're talking about 17 years. I think the amount of conferences I've been to, and it's always being discussed. But you can sense the level of frustration that's also in the room at the same time as the level of identifying the importance and what could potentially happen. But again, as I said at the beginning, I'm going to call it the why show. Why can't people do something that's tougher or make things a lot more rigid at the front end, so that people have to not just be responsible for what they do with the shipments, but be accountable for the way in which they prepare them, the way in which they disclose them, the way in which they submit them. It's all those whys, Mike. Why on earth, governments, regulators, why don't they just now say, this is it, end of story?
I think you have to start, let's go in the whole supply chain. So we go back to where lithium batteries start, the manufacturer, and the process that they're being developed. And even some very good, well-known products have had issues. I just saw an iPhone that somebody took a picture that the battery overheated. One iPhone. But you go back to the manufacturer side. So we have underwriter laboratories and who are very good. They're in the based in the U.S., but they're a global standard. Is there a standard group that's reviewing these products before they even go to the next step? So what is Underwriters Laboratories, for instance, doing to ensure, as an independent safety organization, that these batteries are being properly made? Then you go into the component when they're being shipped. So when they're being shipped, okay, are they handled properly? Were they damaged before they even get to the aircraft? Was there's punctured? Were they charged at the right level for lithium batteries? And now we're focusing on lithium batteries, but there's a host of course, other dangerous goods. But are the batteries charged at the level? They're not supposed to be at full charge. They're supposed to be at a charge that, that's been set. How do you test that? What's the testing process? Then the packaging itself. How do we ensure that the packaging is correct? So you have all of these factors ahead, and there's really good companies that want to do the right thing. But then you get to the handling and the people that actually handle it and are double checking and what that aspect of it is, because at CNS, being an endorsed, an authorized agent, you have to have people that are dangerous goods qualified. And we've had a big debate, and even in this last week of something I was working on before, was that individuals that handle cargo at a cargo warehouse have to at least have due knowledge of what to handle air cargo. If they're handling dangerous goods, they have to be trained in dangerous goods training. And that's part of requirement, even if you don't handle dangerous goods as a CNS authorized agent, to be going through that process. The training that has to be done is based on IATA authorized training schools or through the IATA program. Who else other than IATA really, as a global organization, does more on dangerous good than and what people like Dave Brennan do and others? I mean, they really have focused, and there's a lot of good people in the airline industry that are the most knowledgeable individuals. So there's got to be that base of that training. There are companies that have never had their training even reviewed. It can be great training, but who's reviewing this training? So this whole check and balances get you through that part if everything done properly. But whether you're a shipper, you're a freight forwarder, or an airline, or a ground handler, you've got to have people, if they're going to handle dangerous goods, they have to be trained. And it's an important thing that it's got to be part of their curriculum of doing their job, and not just one time, but continuous.
Yep.
You have people building up cargo that are kind of the last line of defense. Do they know what those symbols mean? Do they even know what's in the packages they're building up in pallets and putting in containers? They should, but do they? So there's this, this whole realm of a certification that, is it really tied together? I think some companies are very, very good at it, but I think there's some companies that they're throwing the boxes around. They're not ensuring, they're not punctured. They're, where they're built and how they're built. That's just cargo that we do know that's dangerous goods that are on the aircraft. When you get the regulatory side, one of the things I would like to see is some kind of body that, when we do find people that aren't shipping correctly, or where does that information go?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
FAA in the US reports and fines companies that improperly ship or handle dangerous goods. And that's public information.
Yeah.
But how do I tie that to the freight manifest? How do I tie that to the cargo and information? And how do I know some companies that did get their hands slapped are trying to do it a different way, going around the system or abusing the system? So when you tie all of this electronic information, like into e-commerce, e-freight, e-airway bill, this is where we really need the computer systems to help us as well, identify players that might be of concern.
Yeah.
And we don't have a common global database for anything like that.
Yeah. But it's, and you've touched on many things there, but especially the chain. And I mean, my goodness me, our industry above all else. I mean, we've got regulations, we've got compliance issues, and God knows we've got a minefield of certifications that everybody loves to have hanging on the wall. But I think we're getting to a point now where a lot of people need the wall hanging for PR and for tenders and whatever, but there isn't that genuine commitment in a lot of cases for people to put the hard graft in for the attention to detail and make sure it really is part of the culture. And I think that's where it's dropping down. Now, the reason it's dropping down is because of the greenback. I'm not just talking about the dollar, but I'm talking about any currency. It's because of money.
Right.
People are doing things to save a little bit here, save a bit there. Even some of the shipments we're talking about are not even declared properly because they don't want it to go through certain packaging and restrictions. That, to me, is totally unacceptable. And for anything, especially anything that can cause lives to be lost or extensive damage, we should have a front end-to-end detail of what goes on, how it's done, what the requirements are of anything that should be included in the dangerous goods regulations. I think now it should be something like that. So a little bit like the ICHM, where it takes you from the consignee to the shipper, but it should have prerequisites of what has to be compliant. And like you said, somebody has got to police it or at least spot check it. And if we've got enough capability, blockchain, whatever, to keep record, it should be companies and people. If people were working for a company and a company has an incident, you should not assume that that person, even if they've got a training certificate, doesn't need a new training. So right. I think the whole thing needs to be linked, and people need to realize how important it is. And all of the, whether you workarounds or agreements of convenience, whether it be with e-commerce or post, they have got to comply with the same type of regulations. And Joe Public or Jane Public have got to understand that when they want to ship something or they want to buy something or whatever, there's a responsibility, and they should be also steered through a proper series of questions or preempting certain activities so that they start to all become aware of it.
Yeah, and I think there's a need to take a look, because like you say, it's individuals. We need to make sure the individuals are knowledgeable and something that, validates they have been trained and involved. But I think the other thing is we have a lot of bad players out there that They know they can get around the system by
Yep.
putting improper labeling. We've seen that. They just put a wrong label that's not what it says it is on purpose. And I've even seen in some of the conferences where it says, please take this label off when you receive it.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, those kind of people. But then with the internet, a lot of companies, small players particularly, are using the system, don't want to declare it, don't want to go through the process, save the greenback, as part of the deal. And what they need to do is you almost have to be a detective of information of who these players are.
Yep.
Where was the address, of these companies? They'll go and change the company and have a new website up and running the next day. Yep. Particularly the smaller e-commerce players, and they just change the name. But there's an address field, there's company names, information about those companies, that if we had the databases checking that and say, I look at it particularly like with the advanced cargo data required before even boarding it on the aircraft, not the manifest, but the advanced cargo data for CBP. I asked CBP, could we not target more of that kind of information for safety purposes under the FAA requirements for safety and security being another aspect? Because we need to start looking for the bad players as well. But then you have, this Hong Kong incident, that was a major telephone, cell phone maker shipping to Bangkok. And now most people have banned that company from shipping because they've got a concern, maybe a flaw or whatever it is of the concern that caused that fire from that company, which is fine. But all of this information needs to be part of the data collected for an airline perspective that governments need to help us on. They need to tell us who they see the bad guys are. And then we need regulators to go back and be knocking on the door of these manufacturers and validating some of these places as well, I think, particularly some of the things we've seen in Asia going on.
Yeah.
And it sounds from what I've seen and heard and talked to other colleagues in China that, the Chinese government says, well, that's not our job. And I think it is our job because, again, if something happens, God forbid something happens with something related to particularly lithium batteries or something of that nature, our industry is going to be shut down.
Yep. Yep.
Passenger cargo capacity go away overnight. And we've got to step up the efforts and knowledge, and it's got to be a full-blown hand-in-hand partnership with governments and industry leaders to say, we're done. This is it. We have got to work on this issue now, because I think there's some people and some of the heads of cargo around the world. It's a great business, but how deep do they go? Some are very good, as we well know, but there are others, they're just, another product we put on the airplane.
Yeah, and it goes to full end of the spectrum. But the people who, and again, it's something that's frustrated me for all this 20,000 helicopter view, and I've got to see it from above. With the greatest respect, that's bullshit now. People need to be paying attention to detail, and they need to get involved in this. And I just think that we've got pharmaceuticals now. We've got, the pharmaceutical parties who are looking at lane risk and trying to make things better because of the amount of loss of pharmaceutical credibility because of excursions, temperature excursions, etc. That's coming along very well. But now I think something needs to be done with trade partners, risk relationships or something, so that people can start to see, and God forbid if somebody abuses it or bypasses it or does something wrong, that's it. There should be no second chances. And I agree with you, whether it's some sort of cyber detective agency or whatever, but they should now have access to do track and trace and have it as a concern or flag it up. And if a company's flagged up and they overcome it because they get a good audit or a good check, then fair enough. But people should be aware that it's an important issue, and it's not something that you can talk around or just bypass. You've got to do this properly now, because it's only going to get worse.
I mean, we are at a light that with as more of these incursions occur with batteries catching on fire or exploding, and the proliferation of lithium batteries, particularly right now in everything.
Yeah.
The big push right now environmentally is, for lawnmowers and lawn equipment and stuff, they're using lithium batteries instead of gasoline engines. So I talked to one of the larger companies that make Briggs and Stratton over here, who make small engines. They're changing their whole supply chain and development of their products to have batteries running more and more of the things. So there's going to be more of that kind of stuff in the air. But it's, what again concerns me are not the bigger companies so much, it's the small guys.
Yeah.
That don't know what they're doing.
Yeah. And exactly. And it's the freedom to be able to deal with those sensitive products in an uncontrolled manner.
Mm-hmm. And I've been very vocal about my concerns of the Post.
Yep.
I have seen things, and as I look and been a member of the Congressional Oversight Committee for U.S. Customs and Border Protection, we've had visits with the head of the commissioner of CBP, and we've gone into a lot of the postal facilities here in the U.S. for incoming mail.
Yeah.
And I think you said it before, they look for a lot of different things. They're looking for bad things to keep them out of the country. But I'm seeing things when just my couple of visits I had in full dog searches, x-ray searches, and everything going on, a lot of stuff gets passed, but they're not looking for undeclared dangerous goods. That's the last of their aspect of its own arrival. But my aspect is when you start comparing what they've manifested in these e-commerce shipments and what's in there, it's not what it is. It's something else.
Yeah.
Or they're trying to bypass the system with false information, and they get by with it. Well, dangerous goods is in there. And I think there ought to be an aspect of where, more government agencies need to look at what's in the cargo. I hate to see government officials at the last minute come in my warehouse and start looking at everything, but I wanted to always work with government officials to ensure that I'm doing the right thing, because I don't want the bad stuff on my planes. I never did. My whole goal is to keep the people and the crews and my employees safe. And I've had warehouse fires. I've had, I've had radioactive spills in a cargo facility. I don't want to deal with that stuff. I mean, it's a challenge, and you try to ensure that the people you're working with are kept safe. But those whole things are what I look at every day as to what could we do better? Could I build this database? Can we build a database? How do we get the postal facility, the post office, to realize that they're cargo players, and they're not just the mail, it's not letters and envelopes anymore, it's packages.
Yeah. Yeah.
The Hong Kong, China Post has their product, for small e-commerce shippers, and those kind of guys, they're just selling on the internet. They're providing goods. We as buyers don't know where it came from. We don't know if we ordered something with a lithium battery. How do I know how well it's manufactured or not? And I don't even know where it's coming from half the time until it arrives. And I have a China Post sticker on the package when it arrives. And so they've developed this product, which is pretty easy for people to ship, small type shipments. And you might have one battery in there, but what's it next to? Yeah. What's what can be the combustion item that's going to make that fire more intense?
Yep, no, 100%. And it's not having a pop at post or e-commerce, but it's just the sheer growth that we've experienced now over this last year, and the flexibility and the reception that people of all ages and backgrounds are now getting involved. So it's going to go more and more and more and more. and it's not to reduce efficiency and time and speed, which is what everybody wants. But like you said, it's to set some foundation guidelines and some real good scrutiny and compliance checks or whatever to make sure that it's not ruined by the few, because it will be if it carries on the way it is.
Right. And I know, like, the technology groups, the X-ray guys, and they're using atomic particles samples. They can detect lithium, and of course, you realize sometimes, I don't realize, I had an electric toothbrush, and then I realized, it's got a lithium battery in it, and I'm checking it in my bag. You're not technically supposed to check that in your bag.
Yeah.
But you forget what you have. Well, yeah, I do have something that has a lithium battery in it. And so those sort of things, technology wise, are out there for them to sample and look for that. It's going to delay, because it takes, doesn't take very long from the devices I've seen, and some when they first started doing it. It's a software change, but it's atomic particle smelling. But who's really come up is like the canines. We've started using canines for detecting explosives. Well, they can also detect lithium if they're trained for lithium. Should we be investing more into that sort of thing as a safety check? Is it worth it? And if they do find it, it may be legit. It's not like it might be declared properly and everything else, but is it legit or not? So how do you build that component into it? But I still go back to I think the biggest issue is data.
Yep.
And this whole thing with E-Freight and IATA DG now, Willie is talking about really focusing on E-Freight again. Well, I have my opinion on that a little bit, because I was involved with E-Freight for quite some time. But I think that information is there. We can harvest that information and use that information. And yes, sometimes it's Big Brother looking into that sort of thing, but it's cargo.
Yeah.
Let's start figuring out, how do we do it? And then how do we educate? How do we get it down to the real shippers? The educational component is a challenge. So a lot of these e-commerce shippers.
I agree. And the education, and even if there was a global PR campaign or education campaign, that any time that you went on to an e-commerce site, post site, whatever, and you had to make a declaration, as soon as it comes on list of commodity and it opens up, you should see a fire, or you should see something that's going to make you think, oh my goodness me. And then the next question should be, do you think you might be contributing to an outcome like this? If you're not sure, please read the fact and make them go through something, so everybody understands their responsibility for the end game. Because otherwise, it's just speed, box tick, 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 boom, press send, gone. That's it. And also, I agree with you as well with the big data side of things, that anything that's manufactured, if it has to be used or it has to use a battery, that should all go into one database. So anytime that product is there, everybody knows it's got a battery in it.
Well, and also if we had a list of registered manufacturers of lithium batteries, we could use that data in a data file that could be checked against. And if we see that there is an issue, whether they're bad or they're doing it because they just want to get through the system, or something in the manufacturing process has been detected that needs to be checked. If we had that in our database and we took an e-airway bill with the house airway bill information, we could maybe mine that data to say, hey, that shipment over there, we need to do another check on it before we board it on the aircraft.
Yeah.
Because something has detected to tell somebody that recheck. Maybe it was dangerous goods not declared, or maybe it was an issue. Could we make smart artificial intelligence working for us to help the guy that's checking it before it gets on the airplanes? The last fact, hey, we got one thing here. You need to go check this, or we believe there's an issue, and give them the information. What should they be checking for?
Yeah, exactly. No, I agree with you. I agree. It's so important now. Now, once the outcome is done, obviously I'm sure there'll be there'll be parties that'll be blacklisted, or they'll have to do something else, or they'll have special treatments to be carried out. And then they'll be focusing on mitigating actions for prevention, etc., blankets and all sorts. But that's not really the solution.
No, it's after the fact. I mean, you know, there we've
and it's
find out the
on.
issue. Yeah,
it's passing it on to somebody else to say, look, we know it's happening, we know it's going to happen again, but please do as much as you can to try and prevent the outcome. And again, why, Mike? Why do they not just come down now very tough and say that's it?
You know, my perspective is, if I was an airplane owner running an airline with a passenger, particularly passenger combination carrier, and you know, this to me would be my number one threat of my airplane.
Yep.
And if that's my number one threat, it would be my number one focus for safety and of the aircraft. You know, there's even concerns that somehow could lithium batteries be used for a targeting purpose to take down an aircraft on purpose. I mean, governments have looked at that, and concerns that maybe there's something that they could use a lithium battery to take down an aircraft. God forbid that happens. Yeah. But we got to think about what the bad guys are going to do, because some people will take advantage of situations like that. And we have to have this constant surveillance and looking at stuff, because, like I say, that would keep me up at night, if anything, is concern of, you know, my airplane going up in the air. Yeah, good God, yeah. No, exactly. Now, if you were part of one of the governments that you've dealt with in the past, or the regulators, now, what would you be doing with your immediate team now as a result of what's happened, and with the history and the frustration and the awareness of experts within the business? So you mentioned Pat Oppenheimer and Dave Brennan. You know, those guys have seen it all. They've got so many things that have happened. They know exactly what's going on. So what would you do if you had the chance now to be in the position to wave that wand to say, right, this is what we're going to do? I mean, if I were a government regulator, particularly a big importer of lithium batteries and dangerous goods that are coming into my country, and I'll take, since I sit here in the US, so I'll say I'm with the FAA. Yeah. And I'm under the PHMSA, PHMSA's, the Safety Administration under the Department of Transportation. Yeah. I would take these incidents, which they have, and they do. They look at this stuff and they see it's out there. But I would go first, you know, go back to the experts, which, you know, you got to talk to the folks at ICAO and IATA and everything, and determine what the main factors are. Was it manufacturing? Was it undeclared? Was it, you know, improperly packaged for shipping? Whatever the issue is, and see where all of the origins are coming from. Now, if all of the origins point to one or two locations, then I would be going and meeting with one or two of those locations, which I think one of them being China, because they are the largest manufacturer of them, and say, hey, we want to improve safety and we want to work with you. And even though we might not always see eye to eye, but this is an issue that's important for both of us. We either are going to work together and fix this, or we're going to just shut them down and not allow them on aircraft coming to our country, because that's what the government has the power of. Airlines can do that, but it goes back into this competitive thing, and some airlines will do that or have done that, and they know it's the right thing to do. But I think it takes the power of governments talking to each other to take into consideration all the things that have happened, and trying to drill down to a true partnership. Let's fix the issue. It's in all of our interests, because it doesn't matter if you're Chinese or you're American or wherever you're from, people will die if we don't fix this issue. Yeah. So those are the kind of things I think really need a stronger level. I think, you know, Glenn Hughes is formerly the head of cargo for IATA. And Nick Kareen, who is the senior vice president over that area. I think they need to drill this on up as the safety issue of safety issues right now. And Willie Walsh needs to go and pound on the door of every one of those regulatory agencies and say, we've got a disaster in the awakening if we don't fix this.
Yeah.
And we have to have the government's help. We have to figure ways to keep it as safe as we can to be on the airplane. And we got to keep the bad guys out of the air.
Yeah, no,
and even off ships. I mean, there's been fires on ships, container ships.
Yeah.
So we're all in this together. It's a matter of trying to bring the right people to the door to really see how serious it is versus waiting for the catastrophe to happen.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And it's not just about policing and then just fining or whatever. It's like you said, it's about education, it's about data access, it's about then having artificial intelligence or some sort of support from that data. But it's got to be done in a more effective way. I personally think in years to come, there'll be classes on e-commerce for young kids to teach them how to participate correctly and how not to get overrun by the e-commerce ease of use. And I think there's going to be so many changes now, but this one, from everybody who's been in the business for long enough and have seen some of the things that go on, something's got to be done now very, very quickly.
I mean, baggage has the same issue. I mean, people's bags have the same issue. I remember incident happened at my old airline. We had a person put a cordless electric drill in their baggage, and the drill started spinning because of the trigger was hit by something in the bag. Well, it's going around and around and around and around, so it's creating a lot of heat. And so we pulled the bag off. I was there, and we pulled the bag off the airplane, and we got this smoking bag going on. Now, it wasn't necessarily a lithium battery fire per se, but the lithium battery did catch on fire from the heat from the bag. And so we had this smoldering thing, and we're taking the bags off the airplane. I was a supervisor on the ramp, and I'm watching this thing, and it's like, it's all burned up, and what caused the issue? And it was a big FAA investigation, but it was in baggage. And there's so many other things, that the awareness is a challenge as many people involved, and whether you're either flying or you're handling cargo. And I don't know you'll ever educate everybody, but my gosh, we've got to come up with better ways to figure this all out.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier about the balance between logic, common sense, and politics. And then that's divided by the greenback, and the outcome is not the best of solutions or calculations. It's got to change.
But you take a look. How much did the Ethiopian 777 freighter cost?
Yeah,
100 million something.
Yeah,
and to write something like that off, to me, $100 million is a lot of money that we could have spent in a different way.
Yep.
And the Assurities, I'm sure the Assurities would be happy to help be part of this because they don't want that risk. And so, again, there's so many different ways in partnership we can to bring in on some of these things.
Yeah, there is indeed. And the other thing as well is, I think the transparency of those that do right, those that do nothing, and those that do something that's not right. That transparency should also be something that people shouldn't be ashamed of putting up and supporting, because that's one of the only ways of stopping it.
And I'm hoping that my colleagues that I've been taking some criticism on why I've been pushing over the last 2 years of more people being better trained, retrained, and ensure that they have the tools and capability and knowledge to be able to handle cargo. Understand that this is, if you're a forwarder or ground handler for an airline, you're the last end of the front end before it goes on the airplane to ensure. And we need everybody to understand, yes, there is a cost to the training, And yes, there are times you have to take these people out of work to train them and get them, and things are very tight. I mean, here in the U.S. air cargo market, there's such a shortage of people at ground handling facilities right now. I was at Chicago O'Hare last week. There are signs up everywhere. We're hiring ground handlers, airlines, and billboards as you come into the cargo areas. We're hiring. They can't get enough people. And so but we have to train those people, and they're high. We talked about this before. These are our best experts that we need to have in the front end. And dangerous goods training is key, and it's got to be dangerous goods training that's current. And they also have to be kept abreast of the issues that, they should look at the Hong Kong. Everybody that's in dangerous good train should be looking at that Hong Kong film and determining, okay, who was the shipper, what was the cause, and let them have updates. So it gets into their brain, and when they're accepting cargo, what should I have been looking for? What happened there could I take and use in my daily work?
And also the way it's loaded, whether something's been dropped, friction, all those issues and you said earlier, the majority of loaders, laborers, etc., they're in many cases they're not trained to handle it because they assume that they're being supervised. But in many cases, and especially in extreme conditions, you get an awful lot of supervision from an office or from a telephone, and that's not the way to do it.
It's hands-on. You got to be hands-on.
Hands-on, feet on ground.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, no, there's got to be change. Well, let's hope that as things bounce back better and people bring back better, that they start to have a different focus and spend more money on training and attention to detail rather than just bottom line and revenue growth.
Well, I think this is a time, air cargo's in the limelight at the moment. And I think we have to really set back and look at a lot of different things, the way we do business and what's in that cost of doing business. You just can't be a freight forwarder and expect you can't train your people and be involved with your people. And same way with an airline. I mean, airlines outsourced a lot of things to ground handlers, but they got to work hand in hand with those partners. And ground handlers, in my ground handling experience, I had a great trainer at O'Hare, and he's still there today. And he does a lot of training for dangerous goods and other things. But when you're working as a ground handler, you're really following the baseline of the dangerous goods, but everybody's got exceptions. So you're trained for 20 airlines if you handle 20 airlines, The base is there, but there's differences in anything by airline, and just knowing where it should be loaded on the aircraft properly. Cargo separation and dangerous goods. I saw a Australian freighter once that was flying out of Chicago. It had 400 dangerous goods shipments on one plane, and it was like the separation and the knowledge of keeping flammables and all these different things that freighters can handle versus passenger aircraft. It took a day to pre-plan where everything was going to be loaded and what pallet to put it on or what type container it had to go into it. And then the captain would receive this big deck of paper. So what are they going to look at?
Yeah, exactly.
They should be able to go on their iPad and point out exactly where everything is, and it should warn them if there's certain things, or they should be looking at in flight or be aware of. So there's lots of tools out there, and there's a lot of great people out there that know this stuff a lot better than I do. I am not ever considered myself a dangerous goods expert. I've gone through the training in the years past, and I used to head up dangerous goods for the Air Transport Association, but I was not the expert. I had a lot of people to rely on, the Pat Oppenheimers of the world that I had to rely on because they live and breathe that every day.
Yeah. No, it is. It's true. And I just wonder what goes through their minds, where they've got so much knowledge and awareness and so much understanding of the the realities. And like you said earlier about being, the last line of defense, but in the same way, it's also the front line of fear and reality, because they know exactly what could happen.
But do you think, Chris, I mean, you've got your background in mind. Do you think the lives we have here today, the people that are working there today, are they better? Are they the same as to when you and I first started?
I think management and leadership has changed, and it has to change. But that's the way of life. I think rules and regulations have become a little bit more fluid, not as rigid and not as checked as often. And I think the ingredients that are in play now, which is all about speed and, growth and doing things faster and cutting costs, it's a paradox against what you should be wanting to do from a safe and a secure perspective, as opposed to a commercial beneficial perspective. So the balance has got to come back in, because we've just gone through one pandemic that nobody was able to foresee. Nobody was an expert on what would happen and could happen. And the balance of power, or the balance of influence, changed from out and out politicians who are looking at the economy to scientific facts. And then everybody started talking about follow the data, not the dates. Yeah. And that took too long. So I don't know whether that like in everything, there has to be a realignment or a stop and a fresh approach, and maybe a little bit more of the brakes rather than the accelerator, so that things are sustainable. So whether the funny thing is, it's not funny, I suppose, but the older you get, the better you think you were.
Yeah.
And that's in sport, that's in any way of life. But there's some tremendous startups and innovative and positive young people that are in the business, and more should come into it. And if they were able to appreciate then that there were certain parameters that you did not mess with, that would be the ideal balance. And so I don't think either one is better or worse, but I just think the pressures of doing business now are so fluid. It's taken away those old standards and those old guidelines and those old checks. And also people are less fearful of doing something wrong now than they were.
Yeah, that part I agree with, the fearful. I think, though, it's become much more complicated in some ways because of the regulatory issues that we all face. The security aspect, all the requirements you have to do, all the paperwork you're supposed to check. I mean, we didn't ever have to do that 30 years ago. But you take a look at that, but, you've got all these other issues. You have, in the U.S., you have the denied parties list at the U.S. government, but you have the State Department list, you have the munitions list. You're supposed to check all of these things that we always were supposed to check those things, but they didn't always get properly checked, maybe as well as they should. But to me, that's where technology comes into aspect, and the e-data. The data could be used, better utilized, to help the person that's actually accepting cargo to ensure all those checks are done.
Yeah, and I think that data and that technology should kick in from the very, very beginning, when shipments are prepared, when they're ordered, when they're made, when the bookings are being done, and there are certain questions that should be up, and a lot of that should be in place. I totally agree with you, but I think the complexity has come because there's so many exceptions and there's so many ands and ifs and buts. And I think if people just went back a little bit more black and white, yes and no, and that was it. And the same thing with, when people register to be a licensed operator in this business, there should be a lot more demands on that license or that entry into doing business than there is now.
And that's the aspect on the U.S. side. You do not have to have a license to be a freight forwarder in the United States. I could be a freight forwarder tomorrow if I want in our deregulated market.
Yeah, and that's
And to me, that is a problem, because I don't think if you want to be in particularly the air transport side of mode, you need to have some qualifications to do that. And that's where, some of the guidelines from what CNS and the IATA requirements does. But, we have thousands upon thousands of forwarders here in the United States.
Yep.
Most of them are great companies, but there are some that are out there that have no idea what they're doing.
Yep, yep. And it's like, where there's one rogue, it has ripples. It's and it has big impacts then if something does go wrong.
Yeah. Joe Frigge, who is the head of Emotrans, who just passed away here a week ago, but Joe was at one of the CNS conferences once when we were in a down period economically. But his whole aspect, this is the time I need to train my people more than they've ever been trained before. Exactly. I cannot let down my guard. And if anything, I should help them better now. So when times do get better, they're prepared and I'm ready to go and I'm going to be ahead of my competition. Yeah. And I think he's always one that led those sort of things. And we need those kind of people out there. We need airline leaders too, that really delve down to these particular hot issues like undeclared dangerous goods.
Yeah. And airline leaders who take an interest in the type of training and the type of competency checking and testing, because there's far too much, again, just tick box for a certificate or because we need to. They need to, it's, at the end of the day, they're accountable for their business.
Exactly. Yeah. That they will be held at one day and something, God forbid, happens. And I think that they got to see the light on this. And I hope that, podcasts like this and other aspects of communications that get out there on this topic go up to the top, not just the head of cargo, but the CEO and the board of the airlines.
Yeah, yeah. And that's where the likes of IATA really, really need to push it across, because sometimes it's that buffer between the operational side and the people with the feet on ground who know exactly what's going on and the senior management. It's those buffer levels in between that are able to filter and block and, and dilute. And that's where it needs to change. The people at the top need to know they're accountable.
Well, I hope, and I'll go back to the IATA. I hope that Willie Walsh is the new director general. When he has the board of governors meeting, we'll have a topic on cargo for a change.
Yep.
And I hope that the topic is what we're talking about today, and that it becomes the #1 topic at the board of governors, and not just something that's buried down in the cargo division. And I would challenge him to take that perspective that we need to look at this #1 safety issue that we have today and put it in the first agenda item of the board of governors of IATA, because it takes them to do it and they don't understand it. There are some that do, but for the most part, you don't see it. You look at their agenda at the top guys. Cargo's got a great agenda. The cargo group has a great agenda, and Nick takes it. Nick Kareen, that's under his area. But this has got to go up. This has got to go to the very top.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I've got a lot of time for Nick, personally and professionally, and I've been joking with a few people on LinkedIn about, it's not too late, but no more debate. And if anyone can, Willie can. So I'm thinking of producing the T-shirts now and starting to sell them, pump them out. But he's got a good chance now. There's a lot of things he can do. Get rid of the airway bill, get rid of all the documentation and paperwork, and sort out this. That would be 2 good strikes.
Yeah. Yeah. And I hope that he makes a selection for the new head of cargo soon too. So that position needs to be filled.
Well, I'm sure he will. But brilliant. Listen, as always, Mike, thank you very much. I'm sorry the basket was full of so many whys, but
why not?
Exactly. Why not? Yeah, we're not going to be able to come up with the panacea or the recipe that will sort everything. But people have got to start asking more probing questions and more whys now, and not be blown by the winds of convenience. But we need to stand firm and do the right thing this time. So, touch wood, please God. As always, it's an absolute pleasure, my friend. Take care.
Same here.
Look forward to seeing you somewhere soon.
Very soon. Talk to you soon.
Cheers. All the best.
Bye.